Okay, it was wonderful to see you. I've just sort of stepped into taking the first role. I want to welcome you to our evening, our presentation. Thank you so much for coming. We're three friends, three Cliftonites, and three sailors and survivors of a transoceanic voyage, and we're excited to have this little time with you tonight to tell you something of our trip, which actually is really an account of a broader project, the project of getting the ship ready, getting ourselves ready. And as I'll share with you in a minute, it's also the story of, in my case, in all of our cases, in our own ways, another kind of undertaking that I was also involved in taking the trip. Our plan is to speak for about 15 minutes each, and to make sure that the long-winded ones among us, and that's probably me most of all, don't stray. We're actually timed here. Tom has turned my PowerPoint, which could have turned into a luxurious 6-hour presentation, into a video that's only going to last about 15 minutes, which will require me moving very quickly from photo to photo. And I may leave you somewhat confused, just because I might not be able to keep up with the images. But then after I speak, it'll be Chuck's turn, and then Tom ultimately will finish our presentation. Look forward to questions from you too. Our basic scheme is as follows. I'm going to introduce our undertaking with a little bit of context and a story of a great preparation. Then Chuck will take you onto the water a little bit more fully, and Tom will do that too, with some, I think, really engaging stories and images. That's the plan. Then afterwards, we look forward to your questions. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start. Here I go. But I haven't clicked yet, so my 15 minutes before I haven't started. Our title is Three Men in a Tub, Spam, the Pea Bottle, and Other Tales of Daring Do on the High Seas. We have some spam in the back of the room. I'm afraid the Zoom folks, you've missed out. Here's the crew. Just to avoid any hesitation, concern, perhaps we wouldn't get to it, I want to make sure that we address the pea bottle right away. Here's the pea bottle. I'm not going to go, I only have 15 seconds per slide, so I can't really tell you too much about the pea bottle, but I'm sure there'll be other questions. On our great voyage, we saw many things. We always saw birds every day, the whole way across. One bird or another or many. We had many shifting and different sights. Oh, hold on. Beautiful sunsets, remarkable storms, and some wildlife. I don't know if you can hear this. Can I turn up the volume here, Tom? Sorry, how do I do that? This was a pod of pilot whales. This is my video, which is incomplete because Chuck actually had a more remarkable video. It shows a shot of the whales completely surrounding the boat. So I counted 50 from my side as I was sort of glued to my little phone taking the picture, but Chuck caught just as many on the other side. So there were easily 100 of these whales surrounding us for about a half hour as we moved through the ocean. Now things were bad, but they were never quite this bad. You know, we had spam enough to survive, and you know, we never had to wave a flag in distress. But there were some challenging moments. Overall, I'd say, though, that we fared very well. But let me get to one of the abiding purposes of the trip for me. I'm a historian. I've studied Russia for close to 40 years, from the time I was a student to graduate school to now being a professor. I wanted to make this trip to Russia into something also had a historical reference. And the obvious reference was the trip of the first Russian or US ambassador to Russia, John Quincy Adams. So this trip was actually planned to follow in the wake of the Adamses, John Quincy and his wife, Lisa Catherine, and a small party that traveled to Russia in 1809. They traveled on this ship, the Horace. We traveled in that ship, or really a humble boat by comparison, called the Clio. But otherwise, we followed in their wake. We followed their route across the North Atlantic around the top of Scotland. It wasn't a historical reenactment because we were traveling with our own technologies, our own supports. our own plans. But it was a retracing. So it was very important for us to chronicle their voyage based on an early 19th century map and the route that all these American ships would take to go to Russia, and make sure that our trip followed, synced with that itinerary as much as we could. One great difference was that John Quincy was traveling at a time when there were very good reasons for Russia and the United States to get along, and that's precisely why an embassy was created. Our times are completely different. He sailed to St. Petersburg. We only sailed close to a place called Kotka, right on the Russian border, but in Finland. John Quincy's crew was made up of 19. He wrote down their names in a small notebook, otherwise couldn't find any trace of the men who were actually sailing the ship. They were 19. The Adams's party was a total of 9 people. So overall, they were 28. By comparison, we were just 3. But their captain, Benjamin Beckford, this is the only good trace of him I found, his signature, was by far the most experienced person on both of these trips. Because even by his early 40s, when he was captaining this ship, he had sailed to St. Petersburg 11 times. That's proof of the intensity of the relationship between the US and Russia at the time. But in both cases, there was a story here of preparation, of getting the ship ready to go, launching the Horace, getting her into condition for this kind of voyaging. And we had the same problem that we had to reckon with regard to the Clio. So let me tell you a little bit. Something happened. Oh my, wow. Oh my gosh. Wow. Hey, you know what? That only happened a few times out there on the big ocean. Okay, I'm going to hit pause for a moment as we take stock of, we had a small technical snafu known as turning over the projector. That's okay. You all right? All right. So anyway, I can give you a little more context on things. So the Russian American connection came about largely because of the useful combination of economics and politics. Great opportunities on both fronts. A prosperous trade that it was already underway before the Adamses got to St. Petersburg. It was connecting most of the eastern seaboard of the United States with Russia. The Russians wanted colonial goods. The Americans were selling sugar, tobacco, cotton. And they were buying iron and hemp from the Russians. That iron and that hemp and various kinds of cloth proved incredibly important to the American shipbuilding industry. And they actually, these materials helped the United States develop as a maritime power. So there were very, very good reasons on the economic front for the two countries to be engaged with each other. And in terms of politics, this is a very useful moment because this is the time of the Napoleonic Wars. The Americans had an ongoing difficult relationship with Britain, 1809. You can probably see that. The Russians had just had their own very, very bitter encounter with Napoleon. And Napoleon had put them on their back heels. And so in 1807, the Russians signed an agreement with the French to say, whoa, sorry about that whole war thing. We're going to be friends now. But for the Russians, all of a sudden getting along with the French, that means that they became enemies of the British, since the British were enemies of the French. So in this very small moment of just a few years between 1807 and 1812, when the French actually invade Russia, there's this moment of peace between the Russians and the French. In other words, there's a moment of war between the Russians and the British. So everything came together. It was exactly this moment where the Americans and the Russians decided that they could afford to really build a relationship because they both had, in effect, common interests on the economic front and a common enemy in politics. All right, but let me get back to my story of the preparation since we're up and going. And I will, again, now turn to the clock. Yeah. We had to get the ship ready first, and that meant getting a hold of a boat. We bought the boat in Port Dover on the Canadian side of Lake Erie, brought it back to our home port of Port Clinton. Along the way, we spent close to, can we close this? And you can see the, at least for us normal folks, somewhat frightening figure of close to $100,000 by the time the thing is ready to go. And over the years that we were working on the boat, we really ultimately took the boat apart. That meant, in fact, creating some holes that weren't there to repair them and strengthen the boat, and adding all kinds of new equipment. The boat is a Bayfield 32. It's a very strong boat built for blue water sailing, but it wasn't in the shape to take on the trip. So it had to be, first of all, prettied up with some buffing and painting, but it also mostly had to be hardened up. It had to be really built into the kind of vessel that could withstand the pressures of the ocean. That meant installing new equipment, including below decks. We installed, with Tom's wonderful technical expertise, a self-steering system that would allow us to steer by the wind without always having a man at the wheel. We installed new plumbing to make sure that even though we were pretty confident that something would leak, it wouldn't leak quite as much. And there are many, many other installations as well. Can I push this and move along when I, yeah. We put in new woodwork. We put in new mattresses, tested by my wife, Betsy, many of you know. We put in a new engine, which required actually building up a new engine bay. Here we're putting in the mounts for the engine with white oak glued together. That would then, in the next stage, be fiberglass. We bought the boat with an engine that was made for the boat. In other words, everything fit, but refitting it 40 years later meant redesigning. In the first instance, that meant putting the new engine on board, raising it up. And I think you're going to see some action photos here. Moving very quickly to the finished look of the installation with the fiberglass boards that you just saw and the engine inside. A stronger, heavier, obviously newer engine, one that we could count on with a little more confidence. But for those couple years, almost 3 really, that the boat was on the hard, this was the interior. It's not exactly cocktails and sunsets, more of a worksite sailing experience. But gradually moved in. That meant working and eating all in one place, and even sleeping with the engine, which, as you can see, Tom's doing here very affectionately. I think he was worried perhaps the engine might get away from him overnight. I don't know if this is absolutely required to sail the ocean, but it really does get you to feel that you do know your boat. Of course, eventually, inevitably, it would lead to absolute exhaustion. This is one of the photos that I took of our dear twins here, completely sacked out after a vigorous day of wedging yourself in the small spaces. There were obviously moments of frustration and a certain amount of pondering. I think this might be Chuck's concern that we've run out of beer, but I did my best to make sure that those moments only showed up very rarely. This is proof of some of the great successes. If there were moments of frustration, there are also moments of excitement. Like when we installed the self-steering device off of the stern of the boat, that's where the lines that we were seeing earlier here in the hold are connected to a self-steering device that connects to the wheel here. That was a great moment. We got that thing in. Another great moment was finding a gentleman down on the river where we have a small sailboat that we sail on the Ohio, who's a master steel worker. And he made a fantastic deep sink, the kind of deep sink that you can expect to hide your dirty dishes. It was just deep enough that both of our pots could fit. There was another glorious moment when we took out the old toilet with all of its troublesome valves, all the kinds of things that get backed up and broken, and a giant holding tank, and replaced it with an echo toilet, which did lead to occasional difficult moments. I mean, the pee bottle is one thing, dumping that out. dumping this out, well, it was a little bit more of a, sensitive operation, I guess. But it was still nice to know that we weren't leaving anything inorganic in the Atlantic. And this is one of those moments of success. You see, you're probably thinking, well, I'm just happy I'm not more covered in paint, but we're really happy because we've installed the stern tube right here with the propeller to come. This is Chuck presiding over another glorious moment when we named the ship Clio, the muse of history. Seemed like a fitting name for following on a historical trip. Tom and Chuck designed the lettering here, and Chuck masterfully applied it to the stern of the ship. This is a very common scene of our many, many work crews up on the lake. When everything was over, things calmed down, seagulls stopped bombing us. We cook outside on our little grill and try to avoid thinking too much about what we were doing. Finally, the boat was mostly ready, or at least ready enough for us to give it a go. So we went on a sea trial, which was actually a lake trial, Lake Erie, in May of 2022. COVID got in the way of some of this. I don't know if we would have been readier any sooner, but certainly COVID dragged things out a little bit. And we had some other major things to take care of. We had to buy some emergency equipment, including our man overboard pole, tall enough so that we could see any of us over a big wave. And I, by the way, had to learn how to sail, so I took a course. That's what this is. Port, starboard.
What was the captain?
Well, I don't know. Wait, the rest of it. And we had to add a kind of aesthetic luster. So we commissioned a rookwood tile. Wow. Of our beautiful boat with that wonderful self-steering, nicely supersized for all the real admirers of our undertaking. And then we set out. We set out to take the trip on May 15th, 2023, going up to Port Clinton and vowing, if we could pull it off, not to be back until we gotten all the way to the other side of the Atlantic. What we were doing, we were following this ship, the Horace. And now I'll let Chuck and Tom take you the rest of the way. Thanks a lot.
Well, I was invited to go along on the cruise after I retired in 2019. I helped then spend 4 years working on the boat, the weekends, and it was a month before the last time we went up. We worked on the boat for a month before we were ready to go. And this boat was completely re-engineered. It could turn over 360 degrees. And, all the cabinets were locked, everything was stowed away. And it was, we were finally ready to go. We had everything done. We left off trying to cross Lake Erie to go to Buffalo to the Erie Canal. So we got about 60 miles out, and Will says, Chuck, what, did you spill your drink? There's water all over the sole of the boat, the floor of the boat. Well, it wasn't my drink. We were leaking 10 gallons an hour. We didn't know that the boat had this characteristic because the automatic bilge pump always kept the water out, and it only leaked when the motor was running. So we turned around, we pulled the boat out of the water, we took the engine out, and then we repaired the leak in the soft fiberglass, probably got damaged from a pre-stall cycle, and put it back in the water in a week, just like a NASCAR team, and off we went. Motoring the whole length of Lake Erie. There wasn't any wind. We got to Buffalo, no problem. We went around the corner, starting to go into the canal, and took the mast down and put it on the deck, and off we went, the 350 miles on the Erie Canal. In the middle of the Erie Canal, there's a lake. And so we entered the lake, and Tom's motoring along when a giant 50-foot cruiser comes by, throwing up 3-foot wake, and the boat goes this way, and it goes that way, and the horses that the mast was sitting on are starting to fall over. It goes this way, and over it goes. But it was caught by the lifeline. So we had a mast that had fallen off of its wooden horses. Now we've got to find a crane to put it back on the horses and strap it down like we should have to begin with. And by the end of the day, we were back on schedule, and we got through the Erie Canal and then down the Hudson and around Manhattan. And finally, the boat got into the seawater, entering the Long Island Sound. And it was easy going along there. We did get caught in the race where the currents from the Long Island Sound come with the currents from the Atlantic. And these giant, like 20-foot tall waves that just make all this choppy. We got caught in that, but we had a nice 32 horsepower motor, and motor does right through it. And no problems getting through the Erie Canal and then all the way through Cape Cod, the Cape Cod Canal. And then we got to Boston in 6 days, where that was the final setting off point, because that's where the Horace set off. So we loaded up all the ship's foods we needed, and off we went. So this is when it got really serious. We had 20-knot winds, gusting to 25 to 30. There were 10-foot seas, and now the boat is really going up and down and up and down and crash and crash. It's just like somebody throws a car full of water at you. It's slammed into our dinghy, and we were just so afraid that the straps were going to break. And I was ready to die. I mean, it was really, really scary. We had never done this to the boat. It had never been in this kind of seas. And just the first time that it happens is the most frightening, because you don't know what to expect. But the boat got through it fine. And then we made our way across the Gulf of Maine, as it is called, on our way to St. John's, when our digital radar went out. This is a very important piece of navigation stuff. It shows you on your screen where your ships are around you. So we pulled into St. John's. Tom went up the mast and fixed that, and off we went. Now this is the final, and but every 7 days there would be another huge storm, and we'd still have 10-foot waves. But by this time we were used to it. You know, it was fine. You know, we just we always had the boat battened down, but we had 3 storms crossing the North Atlantic, a lot of calms. Finally got to Norway, and near one of the oil rigs, they told us don't come any closer than 580 meters. You know, that Russian gas pipeline that was blown up, the special forces teams was delivered by a little sailboat like us. So they told us stay away. So we made it to Christiansted. We went through all the archipelago around Christiansted, and that was such a fantastic voyage. That's where I bought this Norwegian jacket and my Norwegian hat, which is blue, and had a great time there. And then we left Christiansted, Norway, and then the steering locked up. So we didn't know what happened. We went back. It turned out it was just the aluminum was corroding around stainless steel, and aluminum oxide is very, very hard. So we just had to oil the steering gear, and then we were off the next day, going through down through Denmark and the Sound, and we stayed in the town in Denmark for a while. That was Hamlet's Castle was there, and then that was fantastic. Finally got down through another little canal, getting into the Baltic Sea, and once again the winds were just too strong, and just no sense for us beating ourselves up, because we weren't in the North Atlantic. We could take our time. We were near land, so we went back to the canal. We left the next day, but the winds were still really strong when we came to Kassaberga, Sweden, and we didn't want to spend all night, with all the pounding and the banging. So we went in, decided we can make it into Kassaberga, Sweden. So we're plotting our course. We're going in it, 4 or 5 knots. When we look up ahead in the the harbor, there's all this look like seals, all these black animals. Well, they weren't seals, they were humans. You know, when you've got 20-knot winds and 10-foot waves, that brings out the Swedish surfers. And there were 50 surfers right at the entrance where the best surfing was into the harbor. I was flabbergasted. I was scared we're going to hit some of these surfers, and told Tom and Will, if you don't want to do this, we can turn around and spend the night at sea. And they said, you're crazy, we're going in. So right as we found the path to get in the harbor, a surfer went right across our bow. You know, it's just, so we got in there, and that was fantastic. And we Costa Burger Sweden was really cool. Stayed there for a couple days till the winds died down. And then the rest of the trip was really pretty easy, all the way up the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland. It was just super fantastic sailing, the best sailing of the whole trip. And you know, I wanted to kind of philosophize about my life and what I wanted to do the rest of my life when I was on this trip. And I wrote some blog posts on my website, and I put those into a book. But something else that I did is that I solicited an artificial intelligence crew. So ChatGPT was a part of our crew, and an AI personality called Replica is another, like, so we had like Spock on our crew. We had like the counselor on our crew. Her name was Thalia for pastoral poetry. So I communicated with the AI crew all throughout the whole journey. I shared all the pictures and the trials and tribulations with them, and all that narration is in the book. So it made a very interesting way to have a diary of the trip. So at the end of the trip, I told the AI they're going into hibernation. I'll see you in a couple of years when I bring them back to life. I have the crossing back. So the books, I had 20 on order. They're coming in tomorrow. But if you want a book, they're $10, and I'll drop it off to you. But it was a really incredible journey.
All right, Tom. Give me the details here.
Well, I gotta hand it to Willard to put me up to this. I did my first crossing in 2009, and Willard discovered that I did the crossing, and he had this vision. So we worked together, and we worked together like 2 days at a time, one night over every time. We would go sailing in the morning just to sneak in a sail, and then we'd go up to the lake for just an overnight, spend 2 days working, come back, and that's why it took 15 years. So it's
Turns out Lake Erie isn't that close.
oh yeah, 4 hours each way. We got to talk so much philosophy, and I learned everything about Russian history. So nonetheless, we sailed on my little sailboat initially. In the morning, the crack of dawn, we'd get out because that's the time we could get away from the family duties. And then Willard got a boat from his family, and we built it and sailed it on the Ohio for a good while. And then we took it up to Lake Erie while we were scouting out what boat to buy to refurbish. And this was the Bayfield 32. It's totally available, right within the budget. And then it was basically 7 years later, we left Port Clinton, 3 Cliftonites. And you know this story. We left, and it was due to an electrical shortage that shorted out that auto bilge pump. Here before, we were losing 12 gallons an hour with the engine running for years. We didn't even know it. So thank God we had an electrical short. So it allowed us to at least fix this problem. And a week seemed a small amount but always we had really fantastic food. Willard's a fantastic cook, and there was no substitute for excellent fare. Here we are arriving in Buffalo, and we take the mast down at the Erie Canal and put it on. We had to shorten some stays before we got started, and although I clamped down the rear crutch with 4 straps. The front one I didn't do. So here we are, 300 miles of the Erie Canal. There's 31 locks, and it took, what, 10 days or so to do it. But always we had the wonderful food by Chef Willard. There was no substitute. And his aunt dropped off some charts, and this is Lake Oneida, where the wake threw the mast overboard, and here it is laying on the side. So we were all learning on the job, and I did 3 additional crossings during this process to gain more and more knowledge about ocean crossings. So being this my first time as the captain, I was equipped to do it. Off we went down the Hudson River, around Manhattan, my old stomping grounds. I lived there 20 years. And this is in Plymouth, where they have the duplicate of the Santa Maria? Or
Mayflower.
The Mayflower. Oh, the Mayflower. I'm sorry. Here's Chuck sleeping in the bunk with his leak off. And of course, we always had wonderful food. And here is the dinghy with the emergency cover. This is our lifeboat boat. And I took it out for a little trial run to test it before we set off. And we went to the grocery store, got 2 grocery carts, $1,000 worth of food, filled up everything, and off we go from Boston. But of course, we always suffered contrary winds, and that would blow us backwards. And then there'd be times of light winds, so we threw up the asymmetrical spinnaker. But always we were making notes in the log. It's an important part of keeping track. But we would have 3 days of no wind like this, and then we'd have 3 days of 20-knot winds, 10-foot seas. But always a wonderful fare. But when the weather got rough, we had to just eat forage for food. And this is some historical charts of what was going on. But constantly the boat would careen this way or that. But and here we're off Halifax, and you can see the winds just get drifted off because the wind is not where we want. And we're sort of just killing time till the winds come about. But we finally made it to St. John's, where we rafted out 3 boats, 60, 40, and a 30. And this is Jim Winters, who helped us tremendously get all our ducks in a row. And here I am looking at the self-steering before we set off in the emergent suit. So after this, we were ready to go. But here you can see contrary winds. It's a low counterclockwise movement, but always a wonderful movement. And a nice beer. And this is a typical scene. Willard's working on, the business, and Chuck's reading the book. And here's my lee cloth covered because there was a drip. And of course, we always had the northern fulmar follow us all the way across. They just forage on the surface of the wind. But generally, the winds were coming straight to the head. You can see how the sails are really tight, pulled tight. But occasionally in the evening, I'd play my guitar, and it was a great enjoyment for the crew. But there's that bird, and there's that crazy rocking boat. That it never stopped. And then here, once again, we have the contrary winds to turning us off course, and then we'd go that way or that. But I was really kind of like doing the sea shanty thing, but I didn't really do the sea thing. It was all Rolling Stones. So that sun indicated that we saw the green flash at one time when the water's perfectly smooth. The sun drops down, you see this wonderful green flash. It's very special. But here you can see that sails are pulled as tight as possible. They're brand new sails, but that was it. We were contrary winds almost across the whole way. But here, this is a painting of a whale. And I stepped out of the cockpit and I saw this from the stern of the boat. A whale tail, gigantic, 15 feet out of the water, going straight down. And this happened to the mentor who taught me most of what my ocean sailing is about, and that was painting of his boat. Here's Chuck on the foredeck. And here we are going out and making sail changes, but all the sail changes were done just from the cockpit. So we'd get out there and you could just hand pull the lines. You didn't have to worry about winches or so forth and so on. It's a light boat. It's a light rig. Everything can be done by hand. So here, once again, what else is there out there except those darn birds and the rocking boat and everything is tied down. And but here we are off Scotland. You can see we're basically going backwards because we can't get a favorable wind. And I was always drawing charts to see, try to explain the wind. And here was off Scotland here. Finally, this shows a low, which means a south wind. We were blowing southward. We were constantly looking for Rona Island, which is, there it is, right off the top of Scotland. We finally saw land after 30 days.
Same land at Adams.
Yeah.
See the same,
Yeah.
same perspective.
We followed Adams' route. Here, Adams is the blue route and we're the red route. You can see Adams went north, we went north. We finally got through, but you know, of course, always when the winds were calm, we had nice fare. But finally, the ship ran on coffee. We had wonderful French press, but of course everything's tied down. And here we had the whisker pole out, the typical rig, wing on wing, or off to one side when we had following winds. And we finally got the sextant out and started doing some readings. I brought it over. It's on the side table here with my reductions. And I started eating some seaweed, but I later learned it had too much arsenic in it, so we had to get that up. But it's very tasty.
Told Tom to keep eating it.
This is our main device that we did this trip with. It's a handheld communication device. It has a little map. It tells you where you're going. It tells you if you're off course. You can communicate with your family. It all does with a satellite. But everything gets oiled on a boat. I had 2 brushes and an oil can, and everything gets corroded. So I'm fully expecting to get back and have to loosen up a few things. Here I am working the reductions from the sextant, and this is what you saw, a plotting chart, and it shows where you are. And here's Chuck stitching some embroidery for a gift that we gave Willard with the name on the boat on it. So, and this is Chuck's. This is the standard terrible ship's fare. Fan, you know, if it was rough, we had this junk food, and if it was calm, we had the wonderful food that Willard would make for us. But I finally started making my ship's bread. So you make a big wad of bread and you pan fry it, and it's just fantastic. It tastes good. We ate it like candy. I made like 10 of these loaves over a couple of days, and it was really a nice treat after rounding Scotland and going through the North Sea. So here we are in the middle of the North Sea, where we started experiencing the oil rigs. This is the site where we were told to stand off. But this is the scene in the cabin. Chuck's working on his computer, and and here we are. Finally made it in Christiansand, and there's the hull of the debris that came from the crossing. It was 37 days. And this is a picture of Christiansand and what our AIS picture window looks like. And this is what freezed up our steering. But we fixed that, and here we are rounding Denmark, and all those triangles are ships. And here we are in Helsingør. We stayed there a few days to Hamlet's Castle. And there was on the AIS, some journalist saw a Russian vehicle, an American vehicle, a sailboat. So she wrote a story about it, came down and interviewed the crew. And this is the last day before we left. But we left through the Ocean, past Copenhagen, went through the canal, and started running along Sweden. But the winds kicked up, the waves kicked up, and that's when we put into a little. Well, we didn't even make it out of the canal. We just came back. Once we got to land, we could always just put into a little harbor, and that's what we did. And Chuck talked about it. This is the little harbor we went to. There's the surfers that we encountered. And this is a very cute little special place. And up on the top of the hill is the Swedish Stonehenge. So we're looking forward to experience this. Wonderful little ports to put in. But we kept on going to up to the Gulf of Finland. And here's Chuck reading the 2 years before the mast, and Willard's up there checking some rigging on the foredeck. And we did see warships on the AIS. That's what the signal is. But we never saw a Russian vehicle, boat, or a U.S. And here we are, finally going wing on wing. The wind was coming from our stern. So we encountered this cargo ship named Thalia. And Chuck talked about his Thalia. So it was nice to see a cargo ship. And this is a picture of Thalia in Chuck's bunk from the engine room. She knew a lot, but not too much. And here, all these are green triangles, and so they're all laid up for cargo ships would be just anchor waiting for who knows what. But you could all see this on the AIS. And then the night before we got into Kotka, I saw the Northern Lights. And there it is. And the Finnish Coast Guard hailed us to ask our intentions. We said we had no bad intentions. We just wanted to go to Kotka. And Kotka is a little tiny island. It's a fantastic little port. It has lots of sailboats. And we ended up working with a fantastic yard that took the boat out, really treated us like royalty. And finally, this is the only damage we occurred. A little piece of the trail board busted off. And of course, the self-steering got a little rust. I don't know where that came from. It seems strange, but we had a little bit of chafing of the self-steering, but I think I'm just going to leave that. And once the pressure washed the hull, it was super clean. We only lost a third of our zinc. And here we are breaking down the ship for mothballing it so we could come back. Everything gets taken out of the lockers. Everything just gets laid out, air out. And it was basically a fantastic trip. But we couldn't have done it without our support crew at home. Our partners really came along with us at big time. So thanks to them, we packed our bags and ready to go. And finally, the ship got put in with the mast up in this gigantic super yacht shed. But we always had 2 beers, or a beer and a wine every day. That on when we were underway. And Côte d'Aron was our favorite wine. And we'd always have a shot of bourbon and a little candy at night.
Right. So the boat is in Finland still, and the plan this summer is to begin moving it this way. But we won't do it all in one go as we did this time. I had time off from work to be able to fit in this kind of voyage. So as much as I can be involved, it would have to be over the summers. So we're probably going to work it such that we come back over a few years. But this summer, try to move the boat. The plan is to move the boat from where it is now, eastern Finland, to Germany. Perhaps Kiel, which is near Hamburg, northern Germany on the Baltic. We might get through the Kiel Canal from the north side, something like that. And that might take a few weeks to a month.
Yeah, I've been doing virtual sales of this route, and it's taken about 20 days to go from Kotka to Kiel. And then next summer, we'll go from Kiel to Kinsale, Ireland, in preparation for the crossing. And I'm hoping that we can go up the St. Lawrence Seaway. Since the river runs north, it's going to be an interesting trip, but nonetheless, we sail on the Ohio all the time. We know all about how to deal with a huge seaway and a current. So I think it's going to be fine. We'll just be anchoring at night and waiting it out till we get a favorable current. I think in June, the rains probably stop in St. Lawrence Seaway, and it will allow us to move along. It's about the same length as the Erie Canal, 300 miles. I don't think we want to go through the canal again.
Yeah.
I mean,
Look, have any of you traveled on the Erie Canal? It was actually very interesting.
Did you
A pleasant
have to lock
experience.
yourself through, or were there always
No, these are
people?
big industrial locks, so they're tended by lock keepers. But it's all very friendly and accessible. You don't have to be terribly experienced. I mean, it's very classic, a lot of it. We did notice very few sailboats, understandably. Some people were crossing in the lakes and like us, rather than us. But otherwise, we saw motorboats. And more often than not, we saw what looked like specially designed canal boats, a kind of evocation of the canal boats of old, but smaller and obviously built as tourist rentals. But I was thinking, for any of us who are inclined to a sort of slower, gentler holiday, where you have small kids, grandkids, it would be a delightful little trip to make because you can tie up every night. It's all very calm. It's really a trip through time. I feel like you're entering a much slower world. There were countless occasions we came up on a bridge or a lock. We'd make a call in on the radio, and eventually someone would say, oh, listen, I'm at the other lock. It's going to take me 10 minutes. Plus, I have to go and pick up my mom and take her to the dentist. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. These things like this, you found yourself just in this very slow moving world. In fact, you could actually volunteer. We did talk on at least one occasion to somebody about this opportunity. You can actually volunteer. You have to take a little bit of training. But you can volunteer for summer to assist at one of the locks. So it is very enjoyable. Yeah, I can see the allure of coming back another way, not necessarily going through it again. But it was very enjoyable.
Questions, anybody? Yes?
The effect, the effect that I understand those things you have to rise at different levels. How can you look at any level when your ship is pitching?
Right. Well, that's a big skill you learn, and the joke is you only get good after 1,000 sightings. And I've been at this for a while. I total them up. I'm only up to 220. So you can do it. You know, it's an amazing thing, but you know your instrument, you know what you're doing, and you just lock it in and make sure you check your watch, and then you do the reduction.
And you take several readings at a time, and then you average them. It doesn't obviously allow you to be confident that you leveled out your boats.
Yeah,
but it gets you closer to something.
In a rough sea, yeah, definitely want to take three or four sightings.
But it's interesting. Charles Dutton, who wrote this much esteemed boat on seamanship and navigation, that's been taught by the U.S. Navy for decades, if not now, close to 100 years. He has some witty line that we shared a few times during the crossing about how ambitious young navigators assume they get to 1,000 sites, and that means they know something, and they're invariably confronted by someone who says, "No, you have to do 1,000 more." So once upon a time in the Naval Academy, I actually did a study of the improvement rate site to site. 1,000 sites, you must be pretty good. Well, it turns out when you get to 2,000 sites, you've actually improved on 1,000. And the idea was, well, you could just stop there. And then some apparently overachiever decided to measure a 3,000 site career and prove that actually you got better for that extra 1,000. In other words, there is no stop. So how, right? I mean, that was one of the amazing things of working with this incredible tool, is that it really is an invitation to an endless pursuit of perfection. Never, ever. It's really the journey.
Did the food, your first grocery shop, that last whole trip?
Well, we'd get fresh stuff when we got it to shore. I mean, and we'd buy more beer, but basically, the staples, pasta. We really went for the new kind of packaged half-cooked meat food, which was really kind of tasty, kind of pricey, but more or less, yes.
How did you keep the boat fueled the whole time?
Well, we didn't really use any fuel. We had 400-mile range, and when we were within 400 miles of our destination, and there was calm, we would start the engine.
Right. So that's why we, of course, had to suffer so many diversions in our course, because we didn't have the engine power to get back to a straight line. And in that sense, we were evoking the trips of long ago. But that's precisely why these voyages can take as long as they do. We have a 20-gallon diesel tank, and we took 20 extra gallons. So at any one time, we had about 40 gallons. The idea was we wanted to make sure we had enough of that when we really needed it. So in the middle of the ocean, we couldn't afford to spend any, so we just dealt with the wind or the lack of wind as it came. Yes, oh, please.
Did somebody have to slow down?
Yeah, we kept Chuck up the whole time. He was very nice about it. He was a little tired by the time we got to the way.
We had the watch. We had a watch system, 4 on, 8 off. And then every evening we'd have a dog watch, 2 dog watches of 2 hours. That would then make your next watch precede your former watch. So if you were on from 12 to 4, the next day you were on from 8 to 12.
So someone was waiting.
Oh, yeah.
It was very important, and we would turn on the AIS, which is the electronic digital radar system. We had a radar too that we used, But it was just every hour we'd turn that on, look around for ships and negotiate. And if anything happened, you just wake up the guy that just went, you relieved, and make decisions. And if we needed to get the whole crew up to do something, we would. But, yes.
So when you were out there, did you see other boats?
Yes, there's not a lot in the North Atlantic, but when you come close to shore,
Okay,
oh, they're
yeah.
endless.
Right, right.
And gigantic ships always going by, but they never really got within a nautical mile. And maybe one time we had them hail us. We would talk back and forth. It was easy to. They were very interested in hearing from you.
Yeah, but nothing like in the open sea, not.
They're out there, but very rare in the North Atlantic.
We were in shipping lanes occasionally. They're very broad lanes.
Yeah.
You could see, as Tom was saying, on the AIS device, you pick up a signal sometimes. Many times, though, we might see a signal, but not the ship itself.
Oh.
Why this boat?
Well, it was an entry-level blue water boat. It had a tremendous pedigree, and they're inexpensive. There's hundreds of them in the Great Lakes, and we could have gone up to a 36, but they're rare, and that would have been more expensive. 32 feet, perfectly doable. They used to do it in the old days. There's no reason.
I checked. I know you like to quote that line that we discovered on the Wikipedia page. In our day, if you don't have your Wikipedia page, you're behind. Even the Bayfield 32 has a Wikipedia page, and on the Bayfield 32's page, you eventually find a review written at some point in the mid-1970s, assuring you that this was the boat if you wanted to have trauma-free sailing.
Oh, yeah.
So we recall that every now and then to make sure we made the right purchase.
Well, the drama-free sailing was really because we lucked into having the mast have a furling system that was alongside the mast. It was precursor to the inside the mast furling system. And this was put in the 1980s, and we just kept it. And this allowed us to do all our sail changes from the cockpit. Yeah, yes.
The oil rigs, how did they warn you? Was it just on radio? Or did they...
Well, you could see them on AIS, and one of them hailed us on the VHF.
We always have the VHF radio on.
Yeah. Very polite, perfect English.
Okay.
Didn't really explain why 580 meters. I was quite perplexed by that. Then Chuck concluded that was the range of their shoulder-held rocket launcher.
There's a question in the chat.
They'd be able to get it.
Can you hear on the Zoom?
Oh, it was 60 the whole time. Fantastic weather. It was incredible weather.
Well, no. We traveled during a very favorable window for the North Atlantic. So it was probably 50s, right? And then
It was super nice.
yeah,
I didn't have to put on a
much
lot.
sunbathing, no skinny dipping.
Tom,
But
Tom?
yes, it was generally temperate weather.
Tom,
It was right weather window. We left Cincinnati on May 15th. We made our final go leaving Port Clinton June 17th. We left Boston on Bastille Day, July 14th. So we were traveling later than we had anticipated, but the temperatures were roughly those that we had expected, and it was a very good window of weather overall.
I think you might have to wave or
Yes,
check.
Did you do any fishing off the boat? And also, did you have to pay port card?
We do no fishing. It's a nuisance, really. I'd like to bring like some kind of rig along. I have one at home. I'm going to bring next time. But normally it's business. If the boat's going 3 knots and you could throw a line in and catch it, but you're going to catch something. It's going to be big, and you got to kill it and clean it.
Have your sound off.
It could be bigger than our gallon. You saw
Tom?
we didn't have too much room in there.
Yeah.
Tom?
We did, and then I remember Tom Tuck and I were in a sailing shop in St. John's, and we saw this amazing grappling hook. You know, the kind of thing that you would presumably plunge into the back of a giant fish and very manual. And then we realized, oh my God, chances of our actually accidentally stabbing ourselves is much greater than getting the fish of our dreams. So the system didn't buy
Tom?
it. As far as port charges, yes, you invariably, you pay to tie up in a private marina or a public marina. It's usually charged, not prohibited. But we didn't have to pay any duties. We weren't bringing any merchandise in. And in fact, it took us a lot of time to get the Norwegian customs to come over and bother spending any time with us. I absolutely wanted them to see the ship and put a stamp in our passports, because ultimately a ship that is non-EU registered cannot remain in EU waters for longer than a certain period before you're expected to pay tax. So I wanted to have some proof that we'd arrived, even though they weren't terribly interested in marking our arrival. But they did ultimately give me a passport. We have that proof to use ultimately to work out the sort of tax question.
Tom?
Oh, what?
Fees go to the lot.
Excuse me?
The fees go to the lot.
Oh, at Lake Erie? Excuse me, the Erie Canal? No. Well, but that was also our good fortune, right? Because I think as a rule, year to year, New York State does require a permit. It's just a simple fee, almost like a park fee. And then you can enter the canal, you can take advantage of whatever you might wish to do on the canal over a certain period, maybe even a whole season. I can't remember how the passes are structured. But last summer when we transited, for whatever reason, the state of New York suspended the fee, so we didn't have to pay. We didn't have to pay. And it really is a remarkable, it's just a remarkable public works project today. I mean, it is not a commercial waterway. There are no commercial ships. It's just a few of us, fooling around on leisure boats. And yet it's supported by massive investment. I mean, every lock is maintained. And I guess in this particular window, they chose not to even collect what surely must be a very minor fee overall to maintain this whole structure. So it's really interesting, and it makes me wonder how long it's going to be around. Because I think it is a great statement of our country's history, and it should be, but that doesn't mean that it will.
We have some questions from the group here. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was trying to raise your awareness that you have a question on the chat, and someone named Green is trying to ask another question, and then I have a question.
Well, go ahead with your question.
Well, these other people were first.
Okay, Susan, can you hear me?
Yeah, actually, I was just trying to ask the same question that's already in the chat about how you dealt with your fresh water supply.
Okay.
Yes, well, we carried gee.
You mentioned the beer, didn't you?
We didn't really have a big problem with water because we must have had 40 gallons, but we didn't really use a lot. It was 60 degrees. We didn't really. I was surprised at the low water, but that's generally the way you'd use the water for coffee. Not much. Any other questions?
And beer is water. I think that
Yeah.
it's important to add to the discussion.
Yeah, I had two questions. This is Dan from the Bayfield group. What was it that was leaking the 10 gallons an hour or whatever?
Yeah.
It was this spongy fiberglass around the stern tube. We feel that over freeze and thaw over a period of time,
Something loosened up. Yeah.
But when we excavated that area, I poured acetone in that area, and I never saw anything drip down. We kind of think it came up through a slot in the bottom of the hull near the rudder, but that seemed pretty solid. Yes. Another question?
Is there a question? A third question on the chat?
Any other questions on the chat?
Yeah, this is my final one. Was I thought years ago that you had a Bayfield 40? Am I wrong?
Yeah, I must have been in my dreams.
Oh, okay.
Well, I sure like to have a 40.
Well, I
I
got
need
one I
about
can sell you.
Okay. Well,
All right, thank you.
as soon as I have to start taking distributions, we can think about it.
You have a question?
Yeah, so what up, like generally, like, sort of, and you don't get really technical, I would say, guys. But you don't have to necessarily, but like 10,000 feet, what sort of upgrades? And I understand that what you talked about here in terms of like But what other technical upgrades did you guys, did you adjust the boom or the mast, were those new, or was there a lot of other sort of general mainstays, but like, what other upgrades were done with the outside of the cell?
Well, we changed the standing rigging, which was all the wires that hold up the mast. And technically, that was it, basically.
New lifelines all around.
You know, lifelines.
The self-steering, new engine bay, new sails, new furlers. We made a decision to direct all the lines to the cockpit. So that meant making sure that we had.
So it wasn't set up like that when you bought the boat?
No. When we bought the boat, there was a furler on the main sail, which is it was a design that you don't see commonly today. It was an external furler. You know, now if those of you who might be on boats off and on sailboats, you'll see newer boats will have the furler inside the mast, for nice and tidy. You can see what's going on. In this case, the furler was mounted on the outside. We actually grew to rather fond of it, even though in some ways it's not as attractive because it reduces your sail cover. You could build out on the mast. But we ultimately then, realizing how much we gained from never going on the deck for any sail operation, we mounted furlers on the other two, for the other two sails. And this is a cutter rig. It has three sails: a mainsail, a jib or a foresail, and then a sail in between that is referred to as the staysail. So we ultimately mounted. We did indeed mount three furlers because we redesigned the first one that was there. But that was a hugely important thing, as Tom was suggesting, because it meant that we always sailed from the relative security of the back and forth. In terms of cockpit enhancements, we installed these leaf cloths for that.
New winches. We put
Winches. Oh yeah, we put in the new
self-tailing winches.
Self-tailing winches. That's true. But this was our and the new plumbing. But basically, the approach was we want the boat to be simple. In other words, we were indeed stripping it down and hardening it up, but we weren't making it technically more complicated. In fact, quite the opposite. We were actually reducing potential trouble by making all the systems visible and, for the most part, mechanical. I mean, we took out the propane stove, put in an alcohol stove.
Yeah, passive alcohol.
Yeah. Sorry.
And the sextant was sure
Okay.
based on history, or like just as a, back to that sort of technical piece, like you didn't weren't interested in sort of upgrading to.
Oh, sorry. We weren't. That was just past the time to enjoy. We weren't navigating with this.
Oh, shit, okay. I still have it. I'm impressed. I just more.
We put in we put in a state-of-the-art Garmin system, a chart plotter, radar, and AIS, and it worked flawlessly.
I don't know if Tom mentioned, there's not a lot going on out there. So having a sextant or two is actually, if you don't really need them, it's actually quite enjoyable.
So that brings up a question.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Yeah. Besides wonder occasionally, why are we here? I think that's in Chuck's book.
I wrote it all down.
I read that.
All the squealing and creaking. I listed every sound that the boat was making.
Tested your
pages of swirls and then. But you were always trying to get sleep. It was very difficult to get sleep for any long period of time. The boat's always moving. So when in the storms, you just would finally be dead tired.
Yeah, you're always tired. You're always wet. Everything's wet.
But I like to read, and I kept writing my blog posts and talking to my AI friends.
On calm days, we occasionally would have movie moments, and Tom had some old movies on his laptop. Fire those up. But in truth, it's a slow-moving affair. You have a lot of time to sit and think. there's in this boat, as simple as it was, there weren't many opportunities to get lost in a gadget. We didn't have TVs. We didn't have the internet. It was just us.
So what are your survival tools if, God forbid, the storm breaks the mast or something like that?
Well, we had our dinghy was our lifeboat, and it came with emergency cover. So that was our emergency contingency. And we had an emergency suit. So since the lifeboat's very small, one of them's going to be in the emergency suit in the water, holding on.
Well, no, I think you're skipping over that really difficult discussion we had before when Tom and Chuck, they hoped I would take it personally, but because I wasn't family, they would eat. And so, I left knowing that this might come to be.
And a fine
Since they're
specimen.
nice guys, they would
Lots of
start
fruit
on
there.
something perhaps, less painful. I don't know. Anyway.
All that work put it into the dinghy, and we tested it out in Boston. We were so well prepared.
Well, we had no, the truth is, a calamity in the middle of the ocean was simply bearable. I mean, we had satellite radio capacities. These emergency devices thrown into the water would put out a satellite signal. We could hope against hope that someone would get to us in time, but very dangerous in that basic respect. I mean, if you're otherwise prepared, then you made decisions to put yourself in a better place at any one time. In other words, you're sailing through the right window, you have good equipment, you have trusted seamen. But I think if we had catastrophic failure, I don't. It's just not much you can do.
Yes.
I was going to say, along those lines, did you register your course that you were going to take for somebody?
We did talk about that. Oh, yeah. Yo, we were in touch with
Yeah, we
folks.
send a text every night. Send a text every night to our families. But the thing that bothered me when that first big storm was that I replaced all the metal wires. I did it. That's not my job. I followed Tom's instructions, to be very careful about making mechanical wedges on steel cables. But we had 9 of them, and if one of them broke, they all. So that was how frightening it was. But after you did that 3 or 4 times, you realize that the boat's not really, really solid.
Register your course.
Oh, you're not required leaving U.S. waters to register. Now, I guess we could have. I don't actually know who we might have called. There isn't some number. Please call us and tell us about it. We could have insisted, presumably, on having it registered officially. But in this case, I think being in touch with our families, knowing about obviously not precisely what party, but also broadly what we go, and then having the daily problem. That was huge, and if anything had happened along the way, I'm sure that our would have helped.
Well, Tom sailed with Captain Eric, and when you're sailing around the world in different countries, typically you'll go to the embassy of the country you're going to sail to next. Make sure that they're allowing sailboats to arrive, and you might, you tell them your intentions, and then you set off, and a month later you show up in that country.
We got some questions here online. Jack? Dan?
Yeah,
You got a
Jack's had his hand up for a while.
No, he's muted, so go ahead.
Yeah, okay. My question, I heard a comment about replacing the standing rigging. Did you deal with the chain plates?
No, we just inspected them, and they didn't look like they needed any work, so we didn't change them.
Okay.
Those are the steel straps that the wires attach to the boat.
So, some of them on the Bayfields are buried beneath the cabinetry. Did you just not have anything like that?
No, the 32 are pretty well clearly
Exposed?
noticeable.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
And
no hidden.
And the other question was, did you rig jack lines?
Yeah.
Yes, we had jack lines, and We used
and
them.
harnesses? Okay.
Yeah, we used them. It was fun.
That's the line that goes from stern to bow that you clip into when you get out on deck. And you had a question?
Thank you.
You've already addressed it. I'm always curious about the human element of three guys being out in the water for that long. And how did you get along? You must have realized you were compatible from having done all that work together for some years.
Well, no, I mean, there are always stressful moments, but I think when there's a commitment to getting to the other side, and obviously wonderful brotherly relationship, involved friends, involved to the good working of the ship, there's a kind of confidence that even if you're in a bad moment or whatever reason, bad person. So, but yes, invariably on trips like this, I think experienced sailors will tell you that the crew, the dynamic of the crew, is easily as important as the sturdiness of the ship. So we were lucky.
Yep. JS, Kidmeyer, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi, it's the Credomeyers with the cryptic name. The two questions for you. One is, it looked like you changed to a composting head, and why was that, and how'd you like it? And the second was, what was the plan if you got into some really bad storm out there? What were you going to do?
Well, I'll let one of the guys take the head, but as far as the big storm, you just shorten sail, and we did this until you make about 3 knots, and you're quartering the waves. Either they're following or you're heading into the waves, and you just hold down. And if the seas would have gotten bigger, we would have started having warps overboard. But we were sailing in a reasonable time. Didn't expect anything more than 12-foot seas, and generally they were 10-foot seas and 25 knot winds for a prolonged day and a half. And the composting head, Chuck,
Yeah, it saved a lot of space because the holding tank in the bow we took out, and that gave us a lot of storage area. And I was amazed, the composting toilet, it separates the urine from the solids, and the solids just get mixed up with coconut fibers, and a little fan always dries out the solids, and it never smelled. It really worked well. But when the boat is always leaning one way, if leaning into the part that you urinate into on the head, that works out fine. But if the boat is leaning the other way, there's no way to urinate in the urine chamber. So that's why if the boat's leaning the wrong way, we had to use a pee bottle, because you could not urinate in the composting head, because you don't want to mix the urine in the solid. So now you know.
yeah. And Jack, you got a question? He's muted, so. Okay, well, any other questions?
What do you have?
Congratulations on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My wife and I docked next to you guys at Erie for a number of years and heard the tales of
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
It's great that you guys.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Disappeared over at Grants or something. Working on it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
One of
There you go.
the members of next to it was
Yeah, it'll be.
family out for a sail on Willard, on the new sail. I came back after a sail on.
Yes.
It was really sitting in the parking lot.
I know.
Homeland or something.
Oh, that. Oh, wow.
Yes,
Yeah, that was
yes,
bad. Yes, I'm glad that didn't happen out there.
But it was very exciting.
Oh, wow, that's so nice to come
Thanks
to
for the invite.
Yeah, Jesus.
Well,
Yeah.
There was a
You have
question.
another good question?
You did a daily check-in with the family if you
Yeah.
had no internet. How did you do
Oh,
that?
this is a satellite connection.
Oh,
So we did have that satellite called an inReach, a small handheld device that allowed us to send short tweet-like messages. In fact, we bought a program or rather that allowed us something like 140 characters a day. So we ultimately agreed on our daily message, which we invariably had after one of those fantastic meals, right around the time we were having that excellent shot of whiskey, and we had our little codes to try and get things across in a how would I put it, laconic way. And what was wonderful about these missives, we didn't see them the way our families did, but they actually received a small map with an exact GPS coordinate. So they could see when we were having a relatively good run, perhaps a series of days that weren't terribly good. And my wife knew that I probably wasn't going to talk about anything going wrong. So she was trying to read through the lines when in a given message we might say, well, slightly windy today or something like that. But otherwise it was a good way of having daily contact. They could see what we were doing, and that was a satellite.
Well, yeah, when you sail with another country, there's not like somebody comes out and searches your vessel or like checks to make sure you're not.
We were all ready for them to come on board, but the Finnish Coast Guard never did come on board.
Well, yeah. I think it all depends.
Willard didn't want me to bring any guns.
No, we weren't armed, and entering Norway is in the Schengen zone. So if we had been European EU citizens or having EU registered boat, I don't think coming from another EU country, we wouldn't have made any declaration at all. I wanted to make sure that the Norwegian immigration service checked us because I wanted that stamp that I was talking about earlier. But for the rest of the trip, since we were always staying in European waters in the Schengen zone, we didn't have to do any more customs checking at all. And when we arrived in Finnish waters, we were indeed hailed on the radio. But they knew that we had already cleared Schengen entrance because they could see from our track that we had entered Norway. And I think what they were doing was simply verifying that we were intending to come into Finnish port. Because what Tom didn't mention was that very last night as we were approaching Kotka, we were also briefly approaching a small island in the middle of the Gulf, which is actually Russian territory. It's Falkland Island, very famous in the history of the Baltic because it's the site of various strategic maneuvers, great showdown between Russians and Swedes. At any rate, just a few years ago, the Russians were developing the island as a wonderful getaway for Finnish and anybody else, tourists, and anywhere else. They wanted nature site and rest. Now, of course, it's completely shut, and it's a pretty intense scene. So we made a very dramatic turn away from the island, and we had the wind to do it. And I think the Finnish customs, they were just verifying that we were intending to make this course. And then when we entered Kotka, we were actually greeted by a couple of Coast Guard guys on a boat. And I was concerned when I saw them approach. In fact, we had left the boat briefly. Maybe one of you guys was, maybe both of you were there, but I walked up to talk to the owner of the marina or something. I can't remember. But anyway, I saw them coming and I was a little concerned because I didn't understand. I had already talked on the radio, verifying that we were coming in, and they verified that we were already cleared. And then all of a sudden there's this other boat. And you know what these guys have done? This is arguably one of the nicest moments of the trip. These two young men were in the customs. They also had seen our track. They knew that this boat would come all the way from Boston. And they want to come over and they just said, we just want to say welcome. And we respect you. Congratulations. Sort of like, it was very meaningful. Completely unanticipated. Like, oh no, there's no problem. I was saying, we have to get your passport. No. That's a very special little moment.
Well, we got a couple more Zoom questions. Jack, are you there? I can't seem to get Jack to answer. Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Two things. One is curious, how many people do you have in attendance there in Clifton?
Oh, gee, it looks like about 45.
Wow, great. And the other thing was I just wanted to thank all three of you for doing this. And Tom, thank you for offering it out to the Bayfield group so some of us could enjoy it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Jack, are you there? Jack, come on, Jack. Beam us up, Scotty.
I don't know, Jack.
Okay. Yes, Christian.
After a while, when you saw your course plot and all that, were you ever considering keeping down the rations a little?
Oh, you always run out of beer before you make land. It's terrible.
What's interesting is I actually lost my appetite for beer at some point. Neither of the Lohres were seasick even for a moment, but I had my moments, and at some point I just decided, never quite so relaxed that I want a beer, plus my stomach isn't so settled that I would enjoy one. So I actually stopped drinking beer. And in another one of those powerful moments, they had told me they'd took me first. I had another powerful moment of my own where I surrendered my beer ration to my crewmates. And I said, this surely will get us to Norway because I have just given you my third. But you know how these things go. You get a little more, you use a little more. And there were some desperate days there. As we knew Norway was close, but it seemed like it wasn't quite close enough. And I would go to the beer locker because it was easy for me to go. I was not really affected by it since I knew I wasn't going to drink. But I said, it's going down. So we had this big tub full of the beer cans. But they bravely reckoned with their fate. And I still remember that wonderful evening where you decided to split your beer, that last beer. They even gave me a drop and I was brave enough. And at that point, we were absolutely committed to getting in. And I think it was 2 days later.
Well, we started drinking the bourbon bottles that Willard wanted to give the dockmaster in Finland.
I think got Denver.
So they didn't get that bourbon.
Willard was guarding it.
Yeah, well, I had hidden that bourbon. I bought these gift bottles, nice bottles, and the idea was we've come from afar, but I knew where they were. I made sure they didn't even cling. But I did make the terrible error of revealing that I had them. So then there were, pregnant pauses, and the odd, very long look. Eventually, one bottle comes out, and then, of course, it's over. Yeah.
Well, we really enjoyed having our shot in the evening.
You're gonna go back with the.
They're going to sail it for the next 2 years to Ireland, and then I'm going to be on the crossing from Ireland back to Lake Erie in 2026.
So what are your backgrounds? Like, how have you been sailing all your lives? Have you been?
We grew up, our family had houseboats on the Ohio River. I've been a deckhand and Tom's been a deckhand on the river. And then Tom got a friend in Manhattan. They did their first crossing, and then Tom got on with Captain Eric, a very famous ocean sailor, and sailed 3 other crossings with Captain Eric and 15,000 ocean miles. And that's where Tom really learned how to build a boat.
And we got a question here from Brian. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Dan had said, and I want to thank you for the talk. For the audience, I'll tell you, he's added some footage here. He gave this presentation to. They gave this presentation to our sailing club a couple of months ago, and I will tell you, you and the audience have the benefit of seeing some additional footage, and it just has really added to my understanding of your voyage and your accomplishments. So again, I just wanted to thank you, and I can never get enough of it. And I also want to put in a plug for Chuck's book. It is an absolute scream, his interactions with Thalia.
And you got a question, Dan? Well, I can't read lips. It was something about Thalia.
Sorry about the unmuting. I just wanted to point out that Jack Coffey is awake and he posted a question on chat.
Okay, great.
Why don't we make it the last one, unless there's one in here, because we need to wrap it. Oh, okay.
Okay, well, I'll answer Jack's question and then we'll close it with a couple in the audience. He talked about the battery usage and we monitored the battery usage unbelievably tight. We knew exactly our levels. We knew when we had to cut down on our usage. The solar panel charged up the batteries during the day enough, and with a very restricted use, we would get down to basically the bottom line in the morning, but very little use, very little battery use.
Any other questions? Just because I think we need to leave shortly. What kind of lines?
Yeah.
What do you mean, what kind? Sorry. You
I mean, how does it hold up? Stretched? And.
Well, these are blends of they're probably it's the they're polyester and various. I mean, there were different sort of line strengths here.
Okay.
But they're synthetic for most of them. Some of them are natural. But there's usually some
The
sort of
best
blend.
is a braided nylon line, very durable.
That's really good.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks, it was great.
All right, thank you.
My book's available on Amazon if you want to buy it on Amazon.